with us today and engaging with us this morning. Hey, I want to invite you just to do me a quick favor. Would you go on a little bit of a journey with me? I want you to think back to your childhood, as fun or creepy or crazy or whatever that looks like. I want to invite you just to do me a favor and go back to your childhood, and I want you to think about, what do you see? I mean, maybe it's one house, maybe it's multiple houses, maybe you moved around quite a bit, and so there was maybe not the same house, but there was still the same feeling on the inside. For me, I remember growing up, we pretty much always had a trampoline in the backyard. And for me, this was before nets were a big deal around trampolines, and so how we survived, that's a whole nother problem. But we would always play trampoline, or we'd play peg on the trampoline, and we'd have these dodgeballs, and we'd try to jump as high as we can and throw the balls at each other in a very loving way, right? Because, well, we didn't want to really hurt the other person. We just wanted to get them out so we could get on the trampoline. I still remember to this day the parking or the driveway that I had and the basketball goals that went with every driveway. And in every single driveway, you had a little bit of a crack on the driveway, and that maybe was the free throw line. And you had a crack a little bit further back, and that was the three-point line. And I can't tell you how many times I would take the basketball goal, and 3, 2, 1, and it would just clank. And then I would just reset the game. And I'd grab the ball again, 3, 2, 1, and then I would just continue this rhythm, right? Until it finally was a splash, it finally went in the goal, and then, I would throw the ball in the air, and the Rockets would win the championship. The Rockets would win the championship, and everybody was going crazy, except everybody was just me in the driveway. Maybe it's not what you see, maybe it's what you smell. I still, to this day, when I think about the home I grew up in, I love the fact that in our home, there was almost always the smell of chocolate chip cookies, because anytime we had friends over, there was slice and bakes ready because I, as the oldest of 3 boys and us all having teenage friends, the quickest way to get friends to hang out in your home is to feed them and make sure that they get good food. And so everybody wanted to hang out in our house, and I loved that. I loved that growing up. You see, one of the things for me is when I think about the home I grew up in, there were several homes. It's hard to put words to make the feeling correct because it's more than just words, it's a feeling. It's a feeling because really, if we're honest with ourselves, there's a big difference between a house and a home. A house is a place that you can touch. A home is a place that you experience. A house is a place that you reside in. A home is a place where you belong. And regardless of what your home looked like, regardless of what your childhood looked like, here's what I know about you and what I know about just about everybody here and those watching. Even if in the midst of our upbringing, our home wasn't necessarily a place to belong, we know good and well that this is the kind of home we want to create. We want to create a house that the kids, that those that live in the house, that those that are around us, that they can find a place to belong. Because here's what I found about belonging, is when you really find a place that you belong, it eliminates the fear of rejection. Growing up, if you were to be rejected by a friend, or if you were to get, the girlfriend of your dreams broke up with you, and you knew you could run home to a place of belonging, and there everything would just fade into the oblivion, and all was well. You see, when we find a place where we belong, the fear of rejection goes to the wayside. When we find a place that we belong, we can be our real and vulnerable self. We don't have to pretend. In fact, let's be honest, many of us in here, it's easier for us to put a pretend self in front of other people. But the truth is that we really want to be our real self. We want to be real. We want to be vulnerable. We want people to know us for who we are and not the front that we're trying to put forward. And isn't it true that when we find this power of belonging, that we find a place where love truly has no limits, where love legitimately has no limits? we've seen this before, right? If you've ever seen The Wizard of Oz, you know Dorothy, right? She clicked her heels because she knew there was power in belonging. She knew there was power in being home. That's why she would put her heels to there and she'd say, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. And she would continue to remind herself of that power of belonging. But let me ask you this. When we really think about this power of belonging, how does that play out today? How does it play out in our culture today? You know, one of the things I genuinely believe, and one of the reasons we're having this conversation today is because I genuinely desire to see the church be a home. I mean, what would it really look like if the church was known more about being a place of belonging, was known more about being a place that you can call home, was known more about the relationships that inspire and encourage than it is just something to check off of a checklist? In fact, as we look at different dynamics in the generations that are coming before us, I think there's a lot we can learn, not just from the next generation, but there's a lot that is true of us as well. Because when you look at the next generation, one of the things I found is they're more interested in finding a place to belong than just a place to attend. And if I'm honest, I think that's true of us. When it comes to what is church supposed to look like, when it comes to what is life supposed to look like, odds are many of us, we would rather find a place that we can belong deeply than just a place that we can check off the list. So how do we do that? How do we do that, especially in our culture today? How do we genuinely lean in and create a place of belonging? You know, there's the director of religious studies at the dean of religious life at USC. She made this comment in talking about the next generation. I mean, in talking about college students, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds, she made the statement, she said, never before have I had so many kids that ask me on a daily basis, how do I make friends? I mean, think about that for a second. And never before has she seen where on a daily basis college students are coming in and saying, how do I make friends? What does that look like? You see, she would go on to say that we have a belonging gap, that there is a belonging gap in our culture today. So how do we fight that? How can we as a church fight that? Well, there's a philosopher, you've probably heard of his name, Abraham Maslow. He's a pretty fascinating guy. He wrote this, he concocted this hierarchy of needs. And when we really begin to think about the hierarchy of needs, here's what he began to say. In light of everything, he said that all of us have 5 distinct needs, and I think they're very critical for where we are today. The first need is this. It's physiological. You want to make sure that everything is met. You want to make sure you've got a roof over your head, you've got bed to sleep in, you've got food on the table, water, electricity, you know, all of the basics of life. And he said once you've got the first need down, physiological, then you get to go to safety. And he said from safety, you go to the power, to love and belonging. And from love and belonging, you go to self-esteem. And from there, you go to self-actualization. Now, you're thinking, what in the world? There's a lot of words right there. But one of the things he said is this. He said, when you are in your element, one of the things you're going to do is you're going to scan the environment. And you're going to do everything you can to ensure that the first need is met. And once the first need is met, you move on to the next need. And you almost just assume that first need's met. Your physiological needs, once you've got the money in the bank to pay for the bills, you got water, you got food, you got electricity, you don't even worry about that anymore. That means net, and you go to the next one, which is safety. And isn't it interesting that Maslow would say that the third major need is love and belonging? And he would even go on to say that once you find a place where you can connect and you can be vulnerable and you can be you, it is only then that you can begin to take steps towards your self-esteem, towards knowing who you are. And once you've been connected together and you've got you've got people in your corner that are showing you the love and the belonging that you deeply desire, and you step in and you realize I am a son, I'm a daughter, I am who I am. Once you've got people that validate you and know you and fight for you, it's then that you get to realize your true potential. And yeah, that's cool from a psychological perspective, but what about from the church's perspective? You see, I think it's valuable because when we begin to lean in and think about the fact that Jesus came to give you life and to give you life to the fullest, how can we really experience life to the fullest unless we realize that we are sons and daughters of a king, of a God that loves you and fought for you and died on your behalf so that you can too live? And how do we understand who we are unless we put ourselves in community with other people that remind you of the value that you have, remind you of the worldview, remind you that even in the midst of a pandemic when everything seems to be going off the rails, that God is still good. You see, one of the problems I've had, and we're growing up in a culture where people regularly, especially when it comes to mental struggles and to the mental illnesses in our culture today, anxiety, depression, those are things that are off the roof, that are going through the roof, that today teenagers and college students alike are facing more depression and more frustration than ever before. And I don't think it's just them. When you think about the last several months as we've lived in isolation, one of the things I found is that when we live in isolation, when we live alone, the things in our life that tend to be negative, they take on even greater weight when we are living out these hurdles in isolation. I found that in talking with different people that have lost a loved one over the last 6 months, one of the things